should be going live in just a second here. There we go. Okay. Good evening, everybody. I hope you're all doing well. This is Jonathan Ginsberg. It is June 24th, 2026. And today I have a return guest, Spencer Bishins. Spencer was here maybe a year and a half ago. He is a former Social Security employee, a disability employee, and he's written a book called Social Security Disability Revealed. He's no longer with the administration, so he's free to pretty much tell us all the inside scoop. And we're going to talk to him about some of the things that he observed and his thoughts about what's going on now at Social Security. So Spencer, welcome back. I'm glad you made time for us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me again. Yeah, it seems like every time I think I've been with you a few times now, and every time I come on, it just seems like things are getting worse and worse and worse for the Social Security disability applicant / American taxpayer. And so, everything I said in the book was how I knew it at the time when I left. And it just seems like those things are becoming even more and more and more true. And knowing what you're doing and having a good representative on your side as well is even more and more necessary than it's ever been.
Well, okay, we're going to dive into that. And I think, again, it's a little chaotic. I mean, no question about it.
A little
bit. Let's start by telling everybody kind of what you did, what your role was there, if you could.
Yeah, sure. So I started with Social Security in 2010, and I kind of went in the reverse order that you'd expect. I actually started at the Appeals Council in Washington, in Arlington, Virginia at the time. So I wasn't doing things at the hearing level. For your listeners who maybe aren't as familiar with the levels, particularly after the hearing level, because hopefully most of your clients are winning at the hearing level, right? But if you don't, you can appeal your case to the Appeals Council. And that there's no hearing for that. It's just a written appeal. And that's where I started reviewing those favorable cases and unfavorable cases that people were appealing, and favorable cases that were being selected for a random review.
Yeah, let me stop you there, because that's a question that's come up before. And again, based on when you were there, which I know is several years ago, how often would a favorable decision be arbitrarily, reviewed by the Appeals Council?
Well, I mean, we were reviewing them every day. As far as the number, when we first started, we were doing 3,500, but we were a fairly small unit. And then the unit got bigger and was doing more. And then I've heard that the unit was actually eliminated, but I don't know, because things are constantly changing. But as the question of, are they really random? They are definitely really random. Our division director could pull new cases literally whenever he wanted. If we're getting low, he would just be like, how many do you want? 100, 500, 1,000. We joked that behind a painting in his office, he had a giant switch, and he would just pull it, and a bunch of new cases would get dumped into the system.
And just so people understand, these are cases that a judge had approved, and I presume the notice of approval had gone out to the claimant, and the Appeals Council said, whoa, hold on a second, fellows. We're going to go ahead and take another look at this. Is that
actually not even that? We were getting cases with decisions of that day. So, today's June 24th. Is that right?
Right.
I would tell our division director, hey, I think we're out of new cases. I need a new case. And I might get one that said the 22nd or 23rd. I might literally get one that says the 24th, because when the judge goes in and electronically signs it, the ALJ, it doesn't actually go out that day. It takes a day or two. It gets an electronic signature, and it goes to a printing center somewhere else in the country to get printed and mailed. And so I don't know if I ever got a case where the date was actually the next day, but I did get some where the date on the decision was that day. Okay. So I knew about it and read it and knew everything about the case probably before the attorney and claimant ever did.
But to your knowledge, these decisions were being released at the same time they were being reviewed. So you might get a favorable decision in the mail, or your attorney gets it online, and then all of a sudden you get this notice, wait a minute, it's not favorable being reviewed.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the thing, right? I, at the appeals council, might know, oops, this one's got a problem. I see some kind of error here in the process or the evidence that wasn't discussed or whatever. We're going to have to send this back. And I might be making that decision before or at the same time as you, the attorney, or your client are reading it. Oh, yay, we finally got a favorable decision. And I've already read it and decided that's probably not going to happen. And then I would write an analysis to the appeals judges, and they would go ahead and prepare the case, a notice to go to the client and attorney saying, hey, we're going to turn this back around. Any reason why you can think of why we shouldn't? That's a legally required notice, of course. So I did that for about 4 years.
Yeah, I hadn't had too many, but okay. Fortunately, I haven't had too many, but I've had a couple, and you talk about an unhappy client.
Yeah.
They want to know what's going on. I'm like,
right.
It's just, there's probably something in the written decision. Okay. So anyway, so you're at the appeals council.
And most of those weren't ones that we necessarily even thought would have gone unfavorable, but there was some kind of error. Like, you didn't discuss this medical opinion from this one doctor suggesting the person could work. Yeah, as you know, the judge is required to discuss every medical opinion. So if one gets missed, that's an error and it has to go back. It doesn't mean the person's not disabled, right? It just means there was some kind of deficiency in the process and, do-over. We were the do-over committee. And then I moved from there down one level, from level 4, the appeals council, down to level 3, the hearing level, and became an attorney advisor decision writer, where instead of reviewing the decisions, I was actually writing the decisions.
Okay.
And I did that for about 7 years. So I was with Social Security for 11 years total. And then when I left, I wrote the book because I had gathered all this knowledge over reviewing thousands of cases, more than a decade at Social Security. And I realized there are a lot of people, like I was an expert when I left, and I was still at the point where even in my final year at Social Security, I was having to look stuff up all the time, as far as the regulations and the POMs and whatever. How is your average American who knows nothing about Social Security regulations and rules, who just a working person, and they get hurt, they get sick, whatever, something they never expected, and they just kind of assume, like, I'm a good person, I pay my taxes. If I get injured or whatever, if I can't work, the government will be there for me. That's what they're for, right? To help people out when they need it. And unfortunately, that's what most people think. And then when their case gets denied, that's when they have this eye-opening moment of, ooh, now I have to actually start figuring out what to do.
And let me just say this. I mean, I've done this for 35 years, but when I first started doing it, when I first heard about this, I knew nothing about it. I mean, so you talk about just the average guy, who's just hardworking person out there, who's paid their taxes, works their job. I mean, attorneys, if you don't deal with this, you can't really dabble in this. I mean, I speak to a lot of attorneys, and I train a number of them, and I talk to people when they're starting out. Nobody knows. It's a black box. It really is very, very confusing. And I know that's part of why you wrote your book.
Yeah.
But I mean,
and the same way that when you get hurt, you're not an orthopedist. That's why you got to go eventually. Yeah. And your family doctor's like, I don't do backs. I got to send you to an orthopedist. In the same way, you have lawyers that do wills, and lawyers that do criminal law, and lawyers who just do Social Security, because it's that complicated. And the system is set up and designed for you to fail, you being the claimant. Like, the system is designed so that you do not get your benefits. Because if the system was designed for everyone to get their benefits, the Social Security Trust Fund would run out of money. They have to have some guardrails in place. So it's all about knowing how to navigate those, knowing what kind of evidence you need, what you need to prove, how you need to prove it, what to say, and as you know, as a representative, what not to say in your hearing.
Well, why do you say the system is designed for you to fail? What are the what because that's what people are going to ask me. What does he mean by that? So how would you explain what that means?
I mean, if you wanted people to be able to access Social Security disability funds, you'd have a simple application, you'd process it quickly, you'd have a streamlined system for getting their medical records, something like maybe they have in Europe, where everyone in France carries around a card. It looks like a credit card. It's their national ID, and they can go into any doctor's office or hospital anywhere in the country. They insert that card into a computer, and any doctor in the entire country can look at your entire medical record in seconds. That technology's been there for decades in lots of places. So, but we don't have that. There's technology, there's things you could do to make it easy for people to apply, to prove their disability, to show their tests. And, you could lower the evidence burden or the time burden. You've got people who they're injured, they're sick, like anyone who's ever, just like strained their back or twisted their ankle or something, you don't think about how important all of your muscles are and all of the parts of your body until one of them is out of commission for a few days, right? And then you realize like, ooh, I'm glad that was only a few days. Well, now imagine if it's permanent or long-term or deteriorating, like you can't do anything, let alone do things like try and figure out how to get your medical records from your doctor, learn what records you need. How do I get them to Social Security? How do I convince the judge that I'm disabled? What even is the definition of disabled? Mm-hmm. So when I say the system is designed for people to fail, it's designed to have very few people succeed. It's a gauntlet. And, when you're running, do you remember that show American Gladiators? I don't think it's still on anymore.
Yeah,
but
I remember. Right. You had to go through
the last thing on every show was like this obstacle course. And, you had to get through a lot of different stages to get to the end. And at each stage, people were just trying to stop you and get in your way. And that's what the Social Security rules and regulations do. Not just the evidence rules, but the timelines. You have, once you file, you could only get back pay for a certain amount of time. You should have filed sooner. And then once you file and you get a decision, well, you didn't get enough evidence. You have 60 days to appeal. If you put that letter down and you forget about it, 60 days go by, you're done, right? Yeah. So it's not set up to be friendly to the claimant, who is the American taxpayer who's paid their whole life into the system. It's set up so that only the people who are the very best at navigating every stage of that process actually make their way through. That's what I mean by it's really designed to protect the trust fund. It's designed to limit access to the Social Security trust fund because it's the same pot of money for disability and for retirement.
Yeah.
So,
I know people say to me sometimes, I worked and paid into the system. It's my money. Why can't I get it out? I'm like, because they don't see it as your money. As far as Social Security is concerned, it's their money, and they're going to fight you to get it out. They call it disability insurance benefits, just like insurance companies don't readily stroke checks. Social Security is not going to do it either.
What's the tallest a building in every major city in the United States? It's got an insurance company on the side of it. I was just in San Francisco. What's the most famous building there? The Transamerica building. It's an insurance company. They're not calling it MetLife Stadium, but the World Cup final is at MetLife Stadium in New Jersey, an insurance company. Insurance companies are not stupid, right? They know how to make money. And they're for-profit businesses and they're providing a service. But people think but the government's not for profit, right? The government should be there for the people. It is, but it's there for all the people. And therefore, when you pay taxes, you're right. It's not your money. It's the government's money for the benefit of everyone. And there's a limited amount. And so if you need to access that money, you're going to have to fight everyone else for that money. And because Social Security knows that, there's 330 million people and a substantial portion of them are all going to want the same pot of money, they have to have certain requirements in place and a system. But what I talk about in the book is how what I learned throughout my time in Social Security is the system could be a lot easier and a lot more efficient. And it's not. It's really set up. The thing is, with retirement benefits, they have no choice. They have to pay, right? You turn 67 or 68 or 70, you file for retirement, there's no option. Your earnings record is what it is. Your primary insurance amount is what it is. Your years of service are what they are, and they're paying out those benefits. The only place that Social Security can make decisions about paying or not paying is the disability pool of applicants, and therefore they exercise maximum discretion in that regard.
Did you get the sense that there's a, I don't know the best way to put this, that the administrators of Social Security, they have in their mind that what percentage of cases ought to be approved? I mean, right now you see these waterfall charts where it's, every year it's about a third of cases are approved at initial, which are typically listing level cases, maybe 15, 18% at recon, 45 to 50 at hearing. And those numbers have stayed fairly steady. Is that something that is sort of a, do they design the system to fit those parameters, or is it just the way it always has worked out?
Well, I just want to say it's not just the administration, it's also Congress. Yeah. And it's not just the current administration. The administration before this one, and one before that, and the one before that. This, like you said, those numbers are pretty steady over time. And I do think they start with the end result and work their way back. What is our target for the number of approvals we want? But also, let's look at around the country. Oh, these regions or these offices have a higher approval rate. Let's see if we can get those approval rates down. These regions, these offices over here, oh, those judges aren't quite approving enough. Maybe they're being too strict. Maybe we need to see how we can get those approval rates up. Well, how do they do that? Well, hiring, but also transferring judges around the country. If you're a higher paying judge and you've requested a transfer for family reasons or your spouse's work or whatever to a lower paying office, maybe they want to approve that transfer. But if you're a lower paying judge requesting to move to an even lower paying office, maybe they say, you know what, that's not a good look. We need you balancing out the higher paying judges, so we're not going to approve that transfer. Okay. So there's certain things that they can do to, and so that we had this, when I was with the agency, we were constantly being told, like, that when I was at the Appeals Council, for example, we're pulling too many favorable cases. Let's reduce the number that we're pulling. We're exercising review on the own motion review in the favorable cases, meaning we're taking a case that was approved by an ALJ and we're stopping that. We talked about that a few minutes ago. We're doing that a little too much. We want to get that percentage down. And we had target percentages. We talked all the time about, like, we're a little high, let's be a little bit more conservative and maybe just let some things go through. And then if we get a little low, we'd be told office-wide, hey, let's see if we can scrutinize cases a little bit more and find a few more errors to send back because we had a target.
Who's pulling the strings? Is it like the commissioner, people out of that office? Or is it in the actual Appeals Council?
Yeah. So when I was there, it was kind of a little bit of everyone, right? Because I don't know how much the commissioner is involved day to day, but when I was there, the deputy commissioner at that time was really involved, and the chief ALJ. But a lot of that was in response to inquiries from members of Congress, sitting on the two committees in the House and Senate, the subcommittees that oversee Social Security. And, then of course, everyone wants to be involved, right? So even then, when you go from the deputy commissioner down to the Appeals Council, you have division directors saying, I'm going to tweak this and do it my way. And then, but the administrative law judges at the hearing level, they kind of do the same thing, right? You've got nationwide, then you've got the regions, then the individual offices, and they have a chief judge in each office. And then even individual judges, maybe they're thinking like, yeah, I don't want to be told what to do. I'm independent.
Mm-hmm.
And so maybe, they decide I'm going to pay more. I'm going to pay less. Well, this is what I want my individual pay rate to be. So, and they can see their metrics. So if they want to pay about 50% and they can see, the last few months I'm at 30%, maybe I'll be a little more generous. Or the last few months I've been at 70%. Maybe I need to be scrutinizing my cases a little bit more thoroughly. Right. So it happens at every level.
Are the judges reviewed based on those percentages? I mean, the ones I would assume the ones that pay, 75% are going to get reviewed more quickly than the ones that are paying 25%.
Oh, you're meaning on the random reviews?
Well, just in terms of the judges, I assume somebody's looking over what they're doing.
Yes.
I mean, look, there are a couple of judges.
Social Security is not going to admit it, but they did when I was there, and they are. They want to make sure they don't have someone paying. Again, I don't know how much you have talked to your viewers about what happened in West Virginia in the early part of the 2010s, but
a little bit.
They don't want a fraud situation where a judge is somehow paying too many cases and trying to pull money out of the system. And so they want to keep an eye on high paying judges. And, look, if someone's paying 90%, maybe they should be reviewed. And just are you really finding a substantial evidence in every case? That's fair. Just like if someone's paying 10%, maybe we go, hey, really? 1 out of 10 people coming in front of you are disabled? Really? Not those other 9, 10? Or
well, that's the thing. I mean, there are a couple of judges out there, and I've been in front of a couple of them. They pay 12%, 10%, but they've been there for years. And the question I've got, I'm sure a lot of my viewers want to know is, why are these people still there? First of all, why do they become judges in the first place if their goal is not to prove anybody? And secondly,
well, that's exactly why they become judges. Well, that's exactly why a lot of it, I mean, I guess everyone has their own reason for applying for the position, right? But for a lot of people, and I do talk about this a little bit in the book, like who becomes a judge, who are these people, what is their background? Just by the way federal hiring works, a lot of them have military backgrounds because you get a hiring preference if you were in the military.
Yep.
And I realize this is a bit of a stereotype, but the former military judges that I knew, this is true. They are early risers, hard workers, and then they kind of have this, well, if I can go to work full time, why can't you philosophy?
Yep.
And and they'll literally say that sometimes to people appearing in front of them. Someone had a terrible back injury and they're like, but you can't work. Judge, you haven't had the back injury that I've had. As and as ALJs, age and get medical impairments, sometimes they do end up
being a little more reasonable.
There are a couple of judges I know having some sympathy with people, right? And a lot of it is your personal history or people if you've experienced serious medical problems or people who have, you understand that when people are coming in front of you, they're not lying.
Yeah.
And if you haven't had that in your orbit, in your world, maybe you think, I don't know if they're lying, but I think they're exaggerating. I'm sure there's some kind of work they can do. As far as you said, a lot of those judges have been there a long time. A lot of them don't become judges to pay people. A lot of them become judges because they think there's too many people taking government benefits. I'm going to join Social Security and I'm going to put a stop to that.
Wow.
Just like you might have other judges who say, I think it's terrible that you have all these people who aren't asking for a lot, right? They're asking for the bare minimum as far as benefits go. It's not like this is like go out to eat every night money. This is more like survive money that people are asking for when they ask for Social Security disability. And, there's some judges, I would think, who pay 70%, and their philosophy is, look, you've given me medical records. I have no reason not to believe what your doctors say.
Yeah.
And, because everyone who's applying has some kind of impairment and has medical records. A lot of times those medical records are going to prove someone's disabled. And then, you have percentages in between. And some judges want to be a 20%er, some want to be an 80%er. Some maybe don't even look at their metrics and they just judge each case individually like they're supposed to.
Yeah.
But metrics are a very big thing across the entire government. Social Security is no different. Everyone knows where they stand at all times, really. And the judges have a system that they can access that show them all kinds of data, the last week, the last month, the last 6 months, the last year, the previous year, how many were dismissals, how many did they pay, how many did they deny, how many did they set for a supplemental hearing, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So they know exactly what they're doing. And that means if they're doing it, there's intentionality involved.
Okay. Now, Mark asked a question, and I know why Mark's asking this question. Case was denied by a judge. We took it to, I think it went to federal court. It gets remanded. Case gets remanded back to, in this case, a different judge.
Yeah.
Mark, one of my clients, different judge. And his question is, if the judge sees a case has been remanded, is there sort of a subliminal message to the judge? We remanded this case because we think you made a mistake. We're not going to pay it, but we're going to basically sort of say, put our finger on the scale a little bit. Was that your experience?
It really all depends. I wrote a lot of remands. Every remand is different, right? You could have a remand that's kind of reads like, look, judge, you denied the case, but you missed this one medical opinion from a doctor this person saw one time 3 years ago, where there's not really any supporting documentation or objective testing, but you got to discuss that medical opinion. That reads more like you missed something you need to discuss. We don't care if you deny it again. You just have to follow the rules. But then, if the federal court wants to go into all of the evidence that you missed and all of this evidence that, in their opinion, they discuss all of this evidence that supports the claimant and all of these tests, if they start doing that, then what they're saying is, yeah, we think you got it wrong, judge. We're not going to directly pay it because most federal judges don't want to do that, but we're going to send it back to the Social Security judge, wink, wink. That doesn't mean the ALJ is going to pay it. They can read that. And sometimes an ALJ will read it and be like, I don't want to deal with this. I don't want to see this case again. And they don't see it a third time, but more like, I don't want this case coming back to the agency again. And they'll write instructions to the decision writer, just write a favorable decision, have it be supported enough, and let's get rid of this one. And then other times, and I wrote a lot of these, it's like, oh, who does that federal judge think they are? I'm the ALJ. I'm the one who analyzes the evidence around here. I want you to write another decision, and I want you to say all of the same things, but I want you to double down on every paragraph. Or the thing that they said I didn't mention, I want you to write 2 paragraphs on that, but we're definitely still denying. So make sure you write those paragraphs in a way that suggests that that opinion is less valid. Wrote a lot of those. You get all kinds of judges. Sometimes there are judges who go, oop, I made a mistake. I forgot, we missed an opinion. We didn't see it. It was buried in 2,000 pages of medical records. They got me. It was an honest error. And then you have judges, who they almost take it personally, which they shouldn't. It's not about them.
No,
right?
No,
it's about this claimant who's got, these horrendous medical conditions. They can't work, or at least they can't do the kind of work they used to do. That ALJ might disagree with the they can't work part, but the case should be about that person and that person's situation and what that person can do, and the actual objective evidence and the commentary from medical professionals, because lawyers, judges, attorney, advisor, decision writers, we're not medical professionals. We can read the evidence and kind of get some expertise, but we can't evaluate a patient and know, what they can do and not do. So the decision should really be based on medical opinions that analyze objective evidence to say, this is what this person can do and not do.
How important, when I'm doing my brief, I'll talk about the state agency and I'll just, I have to get past that, basically why they made a mistake. Is that relevant to judges at all? What the state agency at initial and recon have decided, whether it's identifying the jobs or coming up with?
Well, no, not the jobs, right? Because they always have their own VE at the hearing. But no, I mean, if you're a judge who denies a lot of cases, then you like to give those state agency doctors a lot of credit, because a case goes through the initial level, then the reconsideration level, then the hearing level. If it's getting to the hearing level, it means it was already denied twice.
Right.
So judges who are low payers, they are very used to saying, hey, we're just going to give those state agency doctors and the consultative examiners at the state agency level, for that matter, a lot of credit. Your own doctor who knows you really well, who's done tests personally, who's been seeing you for a long time, well, that person's biased, right? They want to help you get disability benefits. But those state agency doctors who were paid by the state agency to make sure that the state doesn't have to pay out state Medicaid benefits, those are the impartial doctors.
Yeah. Well, a lot of them are insurance company. They do, work for insurance companies. I see a lot of them, that are, that do independent medical exams, let's say for insurance companies and workers' comp cases, the quote unquote industrial clinic doctors, not all of them, but many of them. And I'm like, these are not impartial, people without a bias, but
even if they didn't work for an insurance company, they're being paid per case.
Right.
And
not a lot either.
No, but exactly, which makes it a volume business, and they're being paid per case, and they know who's paying them, and it's not the claimant. So, if that were you, this is a question for rhetorical question for your viewers, but if you were that doctor and you wanted that business to keep coming in, would you suggest a lot of people are disabled, or would you do what the state wants and suggest that people aren't disabled?
Yeah.
I actually I used to have my personal doctor was a resident, and I was talking to him and he asked me what I did, and I told him what I did. He told me he was a Social Security consultative examiner. And what he says is he would come in on Saturdays, and he would have some support staff that would help him, and they would just put patients in all the rooms, and he would just go one room at a time and just go around for like 6 hours and see like 20 to 30 people, and then do all the dictations the next day on Sunday. So he was with each person for like 10 or 15 minutes.
Right.
He was a resident. He was paying off his med school loans. So he just took as many as he could get. Sometimes it's retired doctors, and that's their retirement job. But, these people are not independent. They have their own self-interest. They want the business, and they're going to please their employer, which becomes the person who's paying them, which is the state.
Yeah. How important, and again, we get a lot of questions here. I want to go to some of the questions in a minute here.
Yeah.
How important is age as a factor? I mean, I'm of the opinion that age is a huge factor. People over 55 in particular have a huge advantage. Over 50, a certain advantage. Is that your experience? Was that your experience that age was a big factor?
So here's the thing. When you say advantage, you mean advantage because of the Social Security rules.
Yes.
They have an advantage in being found disabled, right?
But
that's only
good rule. Yeah.
But that's only to counter their huge disadvantage in the job market, right? If you get hurt, let's say you work in a warehouse or something, or you're a delivery person, and you're doing some kind of physical job, when you're in your 50s, you're probably not coming back to that realistically. And so that's why those grid rules are there. So I think the grid rules are, which help people who are older and closer to retirement age be found disabled a little bit more easily, but that's because there's such a huge disadvantage that older people have when it comes to taking whatever knowledge and skills they've developed over time and translating those to other jobs. If you're 55 and you're working in a warehouse and you have a back injury and you can't go work in a warehouse, and you don't know anything about computers,
right,
or you knew that one specific, because a lot of warehouses have technology, right? But you knew that specific system of technology. You don't know the first thing about learning a new system. Who's going to hire you, right? So yes, obviously, representatives such as yourself know, and the ALJs know about the grid rules, and a lot of those low payers. If you're paying 20%, it's not necessarily that judge is paying a random 1 out of 5 cases. They may be paying the 1 out of 5 where the person is 55 or 60. Yep. And they're like, you know what? I'm not going to fight the grid rules. I'm not going to fight the law. Clearly, this person's down to light work. They used to do medium work. I'll pay that one and I'll move on, and I'll focus my time on the other 4 denials that day.
That's been exactly my experience, that even judges that are in the 30s, they'll pay a 57-year-old with a bad back because the grid rules,
the law just makes it harder for them to deny that. I wrote plenty of denials for people over 55 and even over 60. It happens. Yeah. But it's obviously the law makes it so those people have a little bit of an easier time getting benefits versus someone who's under 50.
There was an idea floated this past December, and I think the year before as well, to get rid of the grid rules. And it got a lot of pushback, because I think that, the idea that you treat a 58-year-old the same way you treat a 35-year-old makes no sense. Like you said, if you're doing physical labor, to expect that, a person who's 58 with 2 herniated discs and, numbness down their legs is going to be able to go back to a warehouse job is just absurd.
Well, but based on that logic, I actually think that, and they're not going to change in the other direction, but I think treating a 49-year-old and a 29-year-old is a bit absurd.
Yep.
Because a 49-year-old is not that different from a 55-year-old as far as technology, and which is even more important than it was 20 years ago, way more important than it was 40 years ago.
Yeah.
If you're 49, and I saw so many cases and wrote so many decisions for people in their late 40s, because people in their 20s and 30s, particularly if it's an injury, if it's an illness like cancer or something, that affects people the same, largely irregardless of age. But, if you get hurt and you're in your 20s or 30s, you heal. If you get hurt in your 50s, much less so. If you get hurt in your 40s, a lot of people who, they got jobs at 18 or 20 doing delivery work or warehouse work, or, working for package delivery companies, or delivering to grocery stores. Like, these are a lot of jobs that we don't see. Those are the trucks that park in the back and deliver the things into the stores. And we don't see those people. They're out of sight and out of mind. But there are a lot of people who do that kind of work. You do that kind of work for 20, 25 years and you get hurt in your 40s. You're considered a younger individual by Social Security, but you're going to have a pretty hard time finding something in the workforce that you can do.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, I think a lot of jobs, and Social Security, I think, does recognize this to some degree. The DOT, which is what, many vocational witnesses still use, last updated the 1990s. Many, many jobs that were quote unquote unskilled or very low end semi-skilled in 1990 are much more computer focused now. And it's not easy to learn all these new systems. I mean, things change at such a lightning pace. I mean, I keep up with it because I have to, but I mean, it is, just AI, for example, that's becoming a real big part of what I do. But, if you don't understand how this works and you have a job that requires you to interact with an AI tool, it's Greek to a lot of people. And
even taking out AI, just how many jobs that existed 40 years ago, but now exist on a screen. You're going to be holding an iPad. You need to know how to use it. You need to know how to use some kind of software. I have a family member who's in landscape design, which, that it's not just doing physical work out there anymore. A lot of that work is done in very specialized computer software. and you have to know how to do that. It's highly skilled. A lot of jobs that maybe we used to call unskilled. First of all, unskilled is ridiculous in and of itself, right? People have to learn unskilled jobs. There are skills involved, even if they're not, ones we learn in law school. But it's even jobs that we used to be more blue collar, you work with your hands. Things are moving online. I mean, warehouses have robots and it's all controlled via computers. It's not just the person driving the forklift around anymore. There's a lot of technology.
Yeah.
And I think this is if you ask me what's the biggest flaw in how the Social Security disability system works, I think it's this. It's the fact that we take someone and we have a doctor say, here are this person's limitations. But then we go to a vocational expert and we say, tell me 3 jobs someone with those limitations can do. There's no way to know if that particular claimant sitting there could actually do those jobs. There's no way to know if those jobs exist where that person lives. There's no way to know exactly how many of those jobs there are. And there's no way to know. A lot of times those are the vocational experts give unskilled jobs, right? Because they can't assume someone has skills. But a lot of those jobs are not unskilled. And a lot of times someone with a high school education would never be hired to do a lot of these jobs that require a technology background. So I think it's kind of a farce, right? We tell people, you can work, good luck, we're denying your claim. But unfortunately, the reality is most of those people will not be able to get a job, to land a job, even if they could theoretically work. And whether they can do a full 40-hour work week in and week out, that's debatable as well.
Yep.
So I do think this is why this is another reason I said the system is designed for people to fail. It's like this theoretical outcome. Well, you, sir, you can work. We're going to find that you are not disabled because you can work. But whether that person actually works, I'd love it if someone did a study on this and followed people who were denied, 10,000 people who were denied Social Security and followed them for 5 years. What happened to them? How many people actually were able to go back to work? What did they do? How long did they do it? How long were they able to hold jobs? I think we would find that we as a country are turning a lot of people away who have nowhere else to go as far as trying to access, a very, very basic living.
Yeah, I mean, it's not. If you think about it, I think the average benefits maybe $2,100 or $2,200 a month. That's like what $24,000-$25,000 a year,
and that's the average. That's including
right.
People who orthopedic surgeons who have a back or a hand injury, so they can't be orthopedic surgeons anymore. But actually, most people applying for Social Security disability are not those high earners. So most people are probably coming in below that average.
Yep. No, that's a very interesting point. It would be interesting to know the ones that get turned down, how many of them actually go back to work versus, ended up, either homeless or on an adult child's, basement. Because I think a lot of the folks, that I see that are turned down, there's no way they could work. There's just no.
You just described someone who's getting paid their benefits. It's not enough money in most cities in the United States to even rent an apartment. You're probably living with family anyway.
Yeah.
You have a little bit of help, but then if you have no benefits, now you're putting this tremendous strain on your friends and family. And really, that is the role of government. That's what a social safety net should be there for. But our Social Security system, despite the name, is not really providing the social security, the security to society that it should.
Well, this was obviously designed, during the Roosevelt administration to be kind of a supplement to retirement for people that retired at 65 and died at 67 or 68. And it's kind of morphed into this, replacement of income. and people that are on it, from the time that, let's say they're 35, they may be on it for 30 years. And of course it's going to run out of money because that's not what it was designed for.
But actually, I think that's not most 35-year-olds, right? That's what that could happen, if it were something that was debilitating and permanent. But a lot of people who apply for disability at 35, it's someone who has some kind of devastating injury, but something that they could come back from. The definition of disability is you can't work for 12 months. Doesn't mean you can't work for 30 years. It means, hey, I'm going to be out. I got to get surgery and physical therapy and all kinds of doctors. I'm not going to be able to work for the next 24 to 36 months. Or like, I've already been out of work for 18 months. Now I finally can get the surgery approved by my insurance. I'll need another 12 months of recovery. But most people at that age want the benefits to help sustain them while they're recovering so they can go back to work, right? The whole point of the system for young people and why those benefits are fantastic is that they allow people who want to work to go back to work. But if that 35-year-old can't access Medicare, can't see a doctor, can't get that surgery, can't get help, or because they don't have financial help, they have to take that injured body and they go out and they work and they make it worse. Maybe they turn something that wasn't permanent into something permanent. They may now be in a situation where now they can't go back to work. Whereas if we had just given them the benefits, invested money into this tax-paying citizen to help them out temporarily, they could have gone back to work and pay taxes back into the system for another 30 years. That's another reason why the system makes no sense to me, because we don't help people who, if we helped them, they would turn around and be productive citizens. Productive financially. I don't want to say people aren't productive citizens, but, by paying back into the system.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Now, I know that a few years ago they got rid of credibility as a factor, but what the judges, do they look at the person and do they evaluate it in terms of credibility?
Yeah, they do. They didn't really get rid of credibility as a factor. I was there when that happened, and it was an eye roll. It wasn't, this person is credible, this person is not credible. Oh, starting on Monday, we got to change the language. This doctor is persuasive, and this doctor is not persuasive. It's the same thing, isn't it?
What made somebody credible? What factors made somebody credible to judges?
All the same things that make their opinion persuasive, right? A treating relationship. Have you known the person a while? In other words, did you know this person when they were fully capable of doing whatever job they used to do, and then you saw a deterioration over time, so you're able to provide an opinion that, yes, this person definitely cannot do what they used to be able to do. Your specialty, or if you're a family doctor, you might not know as much about,
orthopedic.
The discs in the back, or how the back operates, or how the intricacies of a joint. You treat kids with a cough a lot of the time. Those doctors are important, but specialists, when it comes to particular types of conditions, especially neurological conditions, connective tissue disorders, things that are really hard to diagnose. Seizure disorders, unbelievably hard to diagnose, right? So if you have a specialty, how often you've been treating that person, how often you see that person, do you have a really good objective test? All of those things are really important factors when determining, when a judge who truly wants to be objective and make the right decision, those are all things that person can consider. But if the judge has prejudged the case based on the person's age, or where they're from, or what kind of work they used to do, these are all just things you can use to say an opinion is persuasive or not persuasive, regardless of, what that doctor actually said.
What about credibility by the claimant? The judges look at that and say, what are factors that make somebody more credible than others? Let me ask you.
There's certainly a lot of things that judges will talk about to use against the claimants.
Okay.
When you're filling out those application forms, that's just a treasure trove of things to use to deny someone benefits, looking at all of the things they say they can do, right? What do you like to do? Where do you live? What kind of I'm sure you've heard judges ask, like, where do you live? What kind of home do you have, right? If someone's got a back or a knee condition or a breathing condition or something, and that person goes, oh, I live on in a second floor apartment, maybe that's the only thing they can afford, or the second floor was cheaper, or they're living with a family member, or who knows why they're living in a second floor apartment, right? But if you're a judge, you can walk upstairs to a second floor apartment. Clearly you can work, right? So if you're going to pay a claim, honestly, you're looking at the medical evidence, because there's almost always going to be enough in the medical evidence to pay someone, because most people are not cheating the system. Almost no one is cheating the system. People are applying because they can't work. They have notes from their doctors. They have medical opinions. If to pay a case, you can use the evidence. To deny a case, that's where you sometimes have to go into, okay, I'm going to look for every single possible thing I can find against this person. So Mrs. Smith, what do you like to do? Oh, I sit at home and read. Oh, that's it? That's all you do is read? You don't what do you do outside of the house? Oh, I like to do gardening. That's going to be in the decision. This person can do gardening. That involves a lot of getting up and crouching. Clearly, they can do medium work. So the claimant's credibility, the thing is, it's not really needed if you're approving a case, right? But a lot of that information is needed and used. You read these decisions all the time, so you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
That's all used to deny someone. That's why what I said earlier, it's not just about knowing what to say, it's about knowing what not to say.
Yep.
And because maybe that person does like to do gardening for 5 minutes, standing up, 5 minutes a week. It doesn't mean they can work a full-time job,
right?
But an ALJ who wants to deny a claim will absolutely put that in a decision. So without some scrutiny there, it's important that people have that kind of guidance and understand, like, these questions are not for my benefit necessarily.
Right.
This may very well be a trap. And, when people go in and they're unrepresented, they don't know that that's a trap. They're just trying to be honest people. And so, I like to do gardening. But, that might not be the best thing to say, even if it's true. Or you have to say, I like to do gardening, but I can only do that about 5 to 10 minutes a day, only a couple days a week. And if I do it for more than half an hour, I'm laid up in bed. You got to know how to say it. I'm not saying you lie, but you got to know.
Right, you got to give it context.
You got to give it context.
A couple of things I always noticed. For whatever reason, vacuuming seems to be a red button for many judges. Riding a motorcycle is absolutely a red button. You just got to be careful. You shouldn't. I remember I had a client who actually owned a motorcycle and says, "Well, I never drive it." So I said, "This is before the hearing. Why do you have it?" Well, I think I like to go look at it. It was one of my pride and joy. I said, you know what the problem is? If you tell the judge you've got a motorcycle in the garage, he's going to assume you're riding it. You may say you're not, but why would you keep a $6,000 or $7,000 piece of equipment that's depreciating just so you can go look at it?
Yeah, but the thing is, not everyone is a motorcycle, right? So I understand what you're saying.
Yeah,
but what about everyday things like, oh, Mrs. Smith, do you clean your house? Who doesn't, right? Yeah, I clean my house. Oh, do you do laundry? Yeah, I do laundry. Oh, this person can clean their house, and they said they live in a 2-bedroom home and they can clean their house and they can do laundry, so they can work.
Yeah.
A lot of like you said, context is the key there. But when you're trying to deny a claim, you're, like I said, that the judges, it's not like they evaluate all these things and then come to a conclusion. They start with the conclusion. And I talk about this in the book. They start with the conclusion, and then they write a set of instructions to the attorney decision writer. I'm denying this claim. This is going to be the residual functional capacity. Here's each medical opinion, and here's what I want you to say about it. And then they usually, in the instructions, they don't even say what to say about the claimant. They usually just leave that up to the decision writer. Go in to everything that they said and find all of the reasons that suggest they're not disabled, and write a paragraph analyzing the claimant's credibility. That language comes from the decision writer. The judges never get into any of that. The decision writers are expected, if it's a denial, write that claimant credibility paragraph like a denial. If it's an approval, write it like an approval.
Did you ever push back against judges if you thought the cases should have been approved and the judge denied it?
Yeah, all the time. And it's an important part of what the staff attorneys do, both in the hearing office and at the appeals council. But different judges want to hear from their staff at different levels. Lots of judges would be very open to it. I even had judges who would basically say, like, do whatever you think. You're the one looking at the evidence. You're the one writing the decision. Write the decision following the evidence, and that's going to be the most accurate decision. I'm not going to tell you to deny it if all the evidence is pointing toward an approval. And I'm not going to tell you to approve it if there are a bunch of medical opinions suggesting the person can do light work. And so a lot of times you kind of learn, right, as a staff attorney, which judges want your input and which ones don't. And so over time, the ones that don't want your input, you don't even bother. It's like, I'm not going to get through to this person. They've made up their mind. I just need to do this, do the work, and move on. But the judges that are willing to have a discussion, hey, knock on the door, come in, sit down in the office. So here are the instructions. Here's the evidence in the case. Let's talk about it, because I feel like this one should be a blank. Usually I would be suggesting an unfavorable should be favorable, because I would see specific evidence and be like, hey, look, there's an MRI, or there's this, or there's whatever. Look at the surgery report. We're going to deny this? Occasionally it would go the other way around. If the person's 30 and I got multiple opinions saying the person can do light work, it might, if I find I'm having a hard time justifying a favorable decision, maybe I go to the judge and I say, like, I can, do everything I just described to you in reverse, right? All the things the person can't do or has difficulty with in their credibility paragraph. I can write it, but, it might come back from the appeals council. So big surprise, but in my experience, in my opinion, the better judges were always the ones who were willing to have that discussion, because we're all specializing, right? You have front office staff who specialize in gathering the documentation and putting together the file or uploading it into the electronic file. You have people who sit in the office and they greet the claimants. The judge's job is to do the hearing, really. They don't write the decision. Their job is to do the hearing. They are a hearing factory. Other staff are a decision factory. And so I think the better judges are the ones that say, look, I'm going to hold the hearing. I'm going to gather the evidence. It's your job to write the decision. And if you're having a problem writing in a certain way, talk to me. And yeah, I'm willing to listen. I'm willing to flip it, because it should be easy to discuss evidence and then come to a conclusion. That shouldn't be hard.
Yep.
Right. And if it's hard, maybe that's because it's the wrong decision.
All right. And I know you've got to go, so I want to ask you a couple more questions before you, you take lead. This one question people do ask me, did you ever deal with judges who were just completely out to lunch? I mean, just nuts, that just were just impossible to interact with?
Nuts, no. Yeah. But judges who were very difficult to interact with, yes. Okay. Judges who were very low payers. Their opinion of the general public was, I can work, so can they. Not necessarily that people are lying, but people are exaggerating. I have 2 state agency medical consultants who are perfectly competent people who say they can do light work. It would just take even a 20% paying judge is still paying 1 out of 5, right? So not nuts, but it would take a lot to get that judge to approve a case. Those are all either listings or 55, really. And those are the cases that that they would pay, but basically, unless someone had something like cancer or was missing two limbs is a listing, right? So,
right.
If it's not at listing level, their opinion was you're not disabled.
Mm-hmm.
And even people who are 55 or 60, a lot of them, they would tell me, like, I don't think this person's disabled, but I can't do anything about it. Or someone would have a birthday and they would grumble, like, this isn't fair. This person shouldn't be getting paid, but they turn 55, so just do it.
Well, we see a lot. We see a lot of these. I see a lot of times where a judge will change the onset date to the 55th birthday.
Yeah, super common.
When you look at the stats and you see, let's say the judge's approval rating is 43%, but but of those, only 30% are fully favorable. That's telling me this judge is going to change the onset date to try to reduce the number of approvals.
Well, and when I was there, those were called fully favorable. If the person had a representative, they could just say, "Hey, Mr. Ginsberg, this person turned 55. Are you willing to amend the onset date?" Most lawyers will do it because they understand. Well, I mean, they have to talk to their client, but they'll agree to do it because they can see, okay, you're not getting paid before 55. So you got two options here. One is you could just change the onset date and you get a fully favorable decision. Or two, we cannot change the onset date. The judge is probably still going to pay you 55, but it might take 6 months because it's not a fully favorable decision. And then, of course, you're just kind of angering the judge, and they have personalities like everyone else, right?
Yeah.
So they would prefer you just do what you're told. You're not required to, but when I would call a representative and say, "Hey, the judge wanted me to communicate this to you," in my experience, most representatives just want to be able to tell their client you won. And if you have to give up a year or two of benefits, so be it. That affects your pay as the representative.
But that can't be a factor for us.
But what I'm saying is that's a very honest thing for you then to tell your client, "Hey, I think you should do this. I'm going to get paid less, but for you, you get paid, and that's what's the most important thing for you, the client." And that's most representatives are going to do that, right? Because they're honest people and they're just trying to help their clients. And, you don't want to fight the judge or anger the judge or whatever. Yeah. So you give up your own money to help your client.
Yeah, I've pushed back. I mean, I've had a number of times where judges will ask me, and I'm like, no, won't do it. And sometimes when you push back, they'll back down. So, it just depends.
And they might, because they go back and they look at the evidence at 53 or 54, and they're like, maybe I shouldn't be denying this at 53 either. Yeah. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes you get a partially favorable and you have to decide, do I want to go and appeal that? Because, and I talk about this in the book too, and this is one of the really important reasons to have an attorney. If you get a partially favorable decision and you appeal that, the entire decision is put at risk.
Yep.
So if you say I was disabled at 53 and it's a late onset favorable at 55, you got to think about whether you want to be appealing that. And you need an expert like Jonathan, who knows the percentages, knows the judges, knows the appeals counsel, knows what's likely to happen. If you just turn around and appeal that, you're putting the whole thing at risk. And the appeals counsel might say, we don't think you were disabled at 53 or 54. We're also not sure you were disabled at 55. So we're going to send this back to the judge. That's not something you want to happen. So, I talk about it in the book. I go over all of the reasons, all of the ways that the system is designed to go against people. This is what we talked about at the beginning, right? The system is designed for you to fail. And that's just one of the ways that it's designed for you to fail. They'll take away benefits just as quickly. The appeals counsel will take away benefits just as quickly as they'll give them to you. So you've got to know what to say and do, and when to appeal and when not to appeal.
Let's talk about the book. Tell me who's this book for?
I got a copy of it right here.
Who's this book for?
So when I was initially trying to come up with an answer for this question, I was like, this book is for everyone, right? It's for the American taxpayer. If it's for anyone who's ever been injured or sick, it's for people who were older who might be closer to Social Security age, but it's also for people who are younger, because if you're 30 and you work, you could fall and get hurt. You could get in a car accident. And who knows if you're going to be going to work on Monday. But a very, very good marketing person told me that's not the best way to sell a book. Not that I'm not doing it just to try and sell the book, right? I'm doing it to get this information in the hands of people who need it. And that's not the best way to do that, because if you say this product is, or this book is for everyone, you're not focusing on your target market. So I've thought about this, and my target market really is people who, first of all, need Social Security benefits. So they're sick, they're injured, they can't work, they're having difficulty working. They can see that this is coming in the future if you have like a planned surgery, and they know that the system is set up for them to fail. This is not going to be something where I'm a good person, I pay my taxes, the government is just going to help me out. This book is for people who say, I understand this is a difficult system, and I want to be ready. I want to know what to do and when. I want to know what to say and what not to say. I want to know every step of the process before I start. I don't want any surprises. I want to know exactly how the system works. I want to know how it doesn't work. And I want to know what's going to be required of me at every step of the process. And I want to know how to find a good, knowledgeable, qualified representative to help me along the way. Because if you wouldn't fill your own cavity, if you wouldn't fly your own airplane, if you wouldn't tow your own car, to the mechanic, why would you act as your own lawyer? Wasn't it Abraham Lincoln who said, what's the, I always forget this.
Somebody said, we learned in law school, he who represents himself has a fool for a lawyer is what the.
Thank you. He who represents himself has a fool for a client. And it's true, right? Yeah. If you think about it, whatever your area of expertise is, you are an expert. And you do that because you are the expert and other people are not. And in this case, Social Security representatives like Jonathan are the experts and you are not. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't learn something, right? Like if I have to have a cavity filled, I want to learn about Novocaine. How many shots might I need? How long is it going to take to wear off? What are the risks? If my car needs to get fixed, I kind of want to learn, like, tell me what's wrong. I want to go research how much should these parts cost? How much should this take to replace? So you want an expert on your side, but you also want to have a little bit of knowledge, right? Like if you're undergoing a medical procedure, you're going to ask your doctor questions.
Right. Do your due diligence.
Due diligence, exactly. And so this book is not a do-it-yourself. This is not a DIY guide. This is a guide to help people better understand the process and how to work with their expert representative to try and to work together to get the best possible outcome in their particular situation.
Okay. Yeah, look, I think one of the things, that I try to do is educate my clients. For example, at a hearing, we go through exhaustively, when you're testifying, do not use things like, I can't stand for very long. I can't walk very far. I can't lift very much. That doesn't tell us anything. What perspective do you want to bring? That you are describing a day, in your life that is representative of all the days of your life. It's not like a good day or a bad day. It's just kind of your average day.
And similarly, don't tell the judge about the best day you've had this year, because that's not representative either of your average everyday day. You have to know what you're doing. It's just like anything else in life. You have to know what you're doing, but you're not an expert. So educate yourself and have an expert on your side and work together as a team, just like you would your dentist or your doctor or your pilot and flight attendants. If you're flying, you're not flying that plane, but you got to be part of that. You got to know where the exits are, and you got to know what the rules are. Like you can't smoke on a plane, and when you're allowed to get up and not get up.
Right. If you see your friend, Jack in the back of the plane, don't say, "Hi, Jack." You don't want to do that.
Right. And so it's like with everything in life, you want to do your due diligence and understand what's going to happen and in what order, and what do I need to do? What is expected of me throughout this process? Otherwise, you're just going to become another statistic.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think one of the things you said before, I'm just going to go back to real briefly about the forms. And I never really thought about it this way, but these forms are designed not really to help you. It's designed to trick you. And so, I even talk to my clients a lot. When you fill out these forms, you got to be really, really specific, because if you say things that are general, like you said,
like I like to do gardening, for example.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. All right. Anything else you want people to know, just in general, about the process, about the book? How do they find the book?
So I'm sure you'll go ahead and include information about the website and our social media, but you can get it and at major bookstores like Barnes & Noble. You can get it on Amazon. It's available in paperback. It's also available in ebook form, of course, because technology is super important. And because a lot of people with either visual or mental health impairments, or just people who want to learn while they're doing the laundry or cooking, it's also available on audiobook. The disadvantage of the audiobook is you got to listen to this voice for 7.5 hours, because I narrated my own audiobook. But if you're okay with that, it is also available in audiobook and available at libraries nationwide. And if you go to our website, which Jonathan will go ahead and put a link to, if your local library doesn't have it, there's information on my website that you can give to your local library so that they can get it. Love it if you buy the book, but the most important thing is that you have the information. So go get it from the library where it's free. That would be great. The more people who have this information, the more people who can be educated Social Security disability claimants, the more people who are educated citizens, the better.
Any plans for any more books or anything else speaking?
I don't know. I've transitioned to a couple different other areas of the law. So maybe at some point I will, write a book about either that area of the law or just my experience doing different areas of the law. Because for a lot of lawyers, they'll go into one type of law and do that their whole career. And that just doesn't seem interesting to me. I kind of like that I'm doing something now that's very, very different to Social Security. So I'm developing this other area of expertise. And maybe I'll write a book for law students or new law graduates about you can do more than one thing with a law degree.
Well, let me tell you, it's changing. I mean, again, AI being the big thing, but for a long time I taught, and I guess I'm technically still in the faculty of this organization called Solo Practice University, that's designed to help new lawyers or lawyers that are transitioning into solo practice how to actually do it. I mean, you can be a great lawyer, but if you don't know how to set your practice up and how to, go buy computers and get what kind of research services you need, you can get yourself in real trouble. So there's, I think a lot, law is going to change. I mean, I think there's no question with AI, it's going to change. A lot of areas are going to be, do it yourself. I think Social Security might to some degree get a little bit more like this, but
the government is always the slowest area to change, right?
Yeah. But it's definitely changing, and it'll be interesting to see. And I guess final couple of questions. What are you hearing about Social Security from just either reading or from talking to people? And what do you see coming down the road the next 5-10 years?
Unfortunately, as we've already been seeing, things getting worse and worse, and I think that's for claimants, and I think that's just going to still keep happening, right? Congress is not exactly becoming, this institution of handing out government benefits or wanting to make things easier for people. It kind of feels to me like for every one step forward, we have 2 steps back. We had a little bit more favorable decisions and then, about a decade ago. And now they're just kind of doing everything they can it's becoming worse and worse every year. There was a large amount of staff that were let go this year by Social Security. It's becoming harder and harder to talk to someone, to get an appointment at a field office, to get through to someone on the phone, to get past the chat bot. They really don't want you to apply. And if you do apply, they really don't want you to get your information to the agency. And if you do that, they really don't want you to be approved. And if you do that, they really don't want you to appeal. And if you do that, they really don't want you to appeal again. And if you go to a hearing with an ALJ, they really don't want you to show up. You see where that's going, right? That's why I say the system is designed to fail.
Okay. All right. Well, I know you've got to run. I appreciate you spending over an hour with us, and I'm sure everybody does as well. So again, I'll put the links to where people can find the book in the show notes. Continued success with this, and I really appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you for having me again. It's great being
here. Very good, and we'll do it again another point. All right, I'm going to everybody stay tuned. I'm going to go ahead and let Spencer go, and we'll go ahead and answer some questions that have been piling up here. So take care, Spencer. Okay, well that was enlightening. I always find Spencer to be a really interesting guest because he's seen a lot of things that most of us have not seen. And again, I don't think anything that he's talking about is, would surprise a lot of people, but it's got to be a little bit disconcerting when you hear somebody who used to work with Social Security say that the system is designed for you to fail. So anyway, let me go ahead and try to knock out some of the questions that have piled up. And I apologize that we didn't get to some of those with Spencer. I wanted to kind of ask him about his experience. So Mark, we've already talked a little bit about that going back on a remand, in your case, it'll be a completely different judge. I think it's going to be a completely, brand new hearing. The remand order was detailed enough where I think this is not remanded because of some technical issue. I think I read it as being that there's a message kind of being sent. And we can talk about that more in our pre-hearing. But I think hopefully we're in pretty good shape here. So, all right, Shiloh, if found disabled on 8/28/23, and you filed in 26, start of payments would begin February of 25. Should back pay be? Again, I'm not going to sit here and do the calculations, but realize that the 5-month waiting period ran. If you were found disabled, your onset date was August of 23. Then the 5-month waiting period ran September, October, November, December, January, February. It was over in February of 24. So as of March of 25, the 5 months had already run. So if you're going back to February of 25 and you multiply, that's 12 months plus whatever other additional months have accrued since your decision was issued, or that you've been in play there, then that back pay should be that number, whatever it turns out to be. So I think that's, if you're, and again, I'm not going to do a calculation, but I think that your gut is correct. And if they're not paying you that, there's something wrong, is what it boils down to. Okay. All right. James says he's got a hearing tomorrow in Florida, 63-year-old, low back pain and cervical spine. Looks like stenosis. James, my experience has been that anybody in their 60s with back issues has a decent chance of winning. And the reason for that is, number one, the grid rules. And if you look at the grid rules, and I've got the website gridrules.net, if you look at the 202 grid rules, which is the light grid rules, basically it says if you're limited to a light functional capacity and you have no transferable skills, you are disabled. And in addition to that, there's something called a POMS regulation. POMS stands for Program Operations Manual, that says that over 60, if you're limited to light work, Social Security has to prove that you would need to make only a minimal vocational adjustment to a new job, which means it's more difficult for them to prove that skills transfer. So generally speaking, a person over 60 with diagnosed back issues, pain, medication side effects, the odds are, I think, really in your favor. Now, obviously, as Spencer told us, there are some judges who don't go with that, but most judges, even the low-paid judges, the ones they're going to approve are the 63-year-old with diagnosed back issues. So I think you're probably in pretty good shape. Bala, one of my clients, hello, how are you? We are right now going back and forth on her pre-hearing brief, and we'll hopefully talk soon about that. Cynthia, how are you doing? And I'm sure, speaking on behalf of Spencer, he is, I'm sure, thrilled to get the word out. Again, he did this. You don't make a lot of money writing books these days, but I think he just wanted people to understand how this all worked. Chloe, how are you doing, Chloe? All right, so a 61-year-old with progressive spinal fusion disease who was unable to keep up with the pace of sedentary work, recruiter and vocational expert told the judge sedentary work with accommodations could be considered. Does this recommendation sound like she could be denied? Well, again, the vocational witness doesn't approve or deny your case. The vocational witness only answers questions from the judge. So if the judge's questions posed to the vocational witness talked about a mild level of impairment, then the vocational witness will identify jobs that could exist. If the vocational witness is questioned by the judge and there's a significant level of impairment or amount of time off task is 15% of the day or likely missing 2 days of work per month, then the vocational witness testimony will be stronger. But again, if the accommodations the judge described in the question were very, very minimal, then that's not a great sign. So again, progressive spinal fusion disease, ankylosing, you mentioned ankylosing AS, which I'm assuming you mean ankylosing spondylitis. That is an autoimmune condition where the bones fuse kind of automatically. It's not done like you do it in a surgery. And it's sometimes the fusion is not a clean fusion, and there's pressure on the spinal cord. I've had a couple of AS cases recently, and again, I think those are it's readily diagnosed with MRIs and things like that. I'm thinking, that the judge might ask a question to the vocational witness that, talks about mild impairments, but assuming there's other ones, many judges are going to include the more restrictive questions to come up with what their functional capacity, their analysis of your residual functional capacity, and approve it. Based on the age, the nature of the impairment, it sounds like it should be approved. But again, if you have a really low-paid judge, maybe not, but I'm thinking it should be approved there. Big Ta, on my second claim, my last SGA was June of 2020. Does that mean I have no past work? Correct. Basically, if you're going to, and this, by the way, I see this a lot. Right now we're in June of 2026. So June of 2021 is the 5-year look back, unless your date last insured already ran. If your date last insured was in 2025, you go 5 years prior to the date last insured. But assuming that the date last insured is in the future and your last SGA was June of 2020, there is no past work. And a lot of times I'll see cases where the state agency denied it on the grounds they could return to past work. However, there's no past work because now it has been more than 5 years. So that's something definitely to look at. The other thing you want to look at, and in fact, I mentioned this last week, I had a judge call me before the hearing and talk about this, is a person was working, they went to part-time work where it was much lighter. So they were doing a medium job. Let's say they're lifting 50 pounds. They got an accommodation where they're doing the similar kind of job, but part-time and only lifting 20 pounds. The state agency denied on the grounds they could do that accommodated job. The judge was like, I don't know what they're thinking. That's not a full-time job, and it's an accommodated job, so it doesn't really count. So I think that, if there's a situation where you can show there's no past work because it's been more than 5 years, that gets you to step 5 of the sequential evaluation process. You don't have to worry about past work. And now it's an easier argument to use the grid rules. And also, if you're over 55, you're going to be in better shape there as well. So, but yes, I think Big Todd, the big question here is the date last insured. If it's in the future, your analysis is correct. If it's in the past, go back 5 years from the date of date last insured. Mark Oppenheimer, good to see you here. Mark is an old friend of mine. And if you're still on, Mark, hope you're doing well. Dietrich, one of our clients. Good evening. Good to see you again as well. Question, you saw my video a couple of years ago. If you're on SSDI unearned income, and I wanted to know if it's still the same. Yes, if you're getting dividend income, if you get a retirement check, you get accrued sick leave, you win the lottery. That does not count as earned income because you are not working for it. So as long as and sometimes it gets a little messier with real estate. Let's say you own real estate, you're collecting rent. It's probably passive unless you are physically, working on the the property and you're physically going to collect the rents, it might be argued that you're engaged in some sort of activity. But generally speaking, passive income is not going to be considered for SGA. Sunshine says 6-year-old with vagus nerve injury causing gastroparesis, upset stomach, have to have a feeding tube. My God, 22 hours a day, extreme fatigue, not able to work, have an application. Does your case sound? Yes. If you are getting a feeding tube, I think that's a pretty winning case for a couple of reasons. One, it's indicative of severe problem. You need a feeding tube. You can't eat on your own, and you have severe nausea. That's going to make it really hard to work. But the fact that you're having a feeding tube, you're not getting nutrition, you have extreme fatigue, which is consistent with that. You're 60. I think it's pretty reasonable to think you'd be limited to a light RFC, light residual functional capacity. You're not going to lift with a feeding tube just physically because it's probably dangerous to lift, more than 20 pounds, probably less than that. So I think you're going to be limited to light work. And if you're nauseous, you're in pain, you're weak, that's going to eliminate any transferable skills. I think you meet the grid, look at 202.06 and 202.04. Or I think you could argue your functional capacity has been so reduced by your symptoms, you would be disabled. I think that's a winning case. I would take that case in a minute. I think it's a winning case. Mary Simmons says, hello, Mary Simmons. Patrick O'Malley, if you're in the recon phase and they call you, is that a good sign? Please let me know. I'm also a disabled combat veteran. When people say if they call me, is that a good sign? It kind of depends on what they call you about. Sometimes the adjudicator wants to clear something up, and many times that's a positive thing, but it doesn't guarantee you anything. The fact that you're a disabled combat veteran, if you're 100% VA disabled, that benefits you. That'll get you to the front of the line. I think there is a certain sense in Social Security that people who've put their life on their line for this country should get a little extra consideration. I certainly think so. So I would say cautiously optimistic about those factors. But again, if they call you because they want to get a zip code for, a third-party contract, or they want to get an address for a doctor you went to, may not mean anything at all. But I think let's go with it's a positive sign. I think generally speaking, it probably would be. James Lytle, my videos are pure gold. Okay, great. Thank you very much, James. I'm going to give you appreciate that. And I'm going to tell you here, if you have not, for anybody who finds the videos useful, and I just recorded a bunch more. I got to get them to my son to get get them to be edited. But if you find the videos useful, please leave me a review. That would be most appreciated. Hakasad, what did I notice was the most predominant reason for reviewing proved cases not triggering a review of an approved case? I'm not sure if you're going back to what Spencer was talking about, where the appeals council would review an approved case and then maybe send it back to the judge. I think what he was getting at was that if you are looking at a decision as the appeals council and you see that the judge left out a discussion of something important, in order for that to be viable, you want the judge to cross the T and dot the I. For example, if there was an MRI that showed a herniated disc and the judge did mention it, that's probably something that needs to be fixed. And you say, well, why does it matter? Well, because down the road, if that case is pulled for review, they're going to look at that decision. If they don't see it in there, it won't be considered as a historical fact, which might benefit you. So I think what he was saying is that, the appeals council is going to look at those decisions to make sure that they are properly reasoned. And again, sometimes they'll put them back and then they'll ask the judge to reevaluate it. The other thing is, and Spencer didn't really mention this, but I've heard it from other people, the judge hears your case. And Spencer mentioned that the judge's job is to judge. Then it goes to a decision writer who wasn't there. And the decision writer is listening to an audio, looking at some notes, and they have a limited amount of time. Elise Enton, who is a former decision writer, she said there's a certain number of minutes that they have to write the decision. There can be a disconnect between what happened at the hearing and what the hearing notes and the audio say. And so sometimes the decision writer doesn't get to something or doesn't mention something that was important because it wasn't highlighted in the materials he got, or he ran out of time. So Social Security wants to, make sure it's done correctly, so they'll send it back for that reason. James, thank you, James. I appreciate that very much. Heather Shante, good evening, Heather. Hope you're doing well. So what happens when an approved case is reviewed and approval is reversed? Is the case returned for clarification, or just it's typically returned for clarification? It's not denied. It's just returned for clarification. They ask the judge to look at it, but of course, a judge looks at it, and again, listen to what Spencer said. A judge might, issue a decision. The decision writer writes it. The judge kind of just, scans it, and it's an approval. Now the appeals counsel says you didn't do something right. What's the judge going to do? He's going to look at it a lot more critically. Could that mean the case gets denied? It could. I don't think the appeals counsel is sending it back saying, deny this case. The appeals counsel is saying you didn't, follow procedure. You didn't discuss, let's say, for example, the person has a physical impairment. They're 57 years old and the GRID's rules were not mentioned. That would be grounds to send it back. You talk about the GRID rules, not saying deny it, just saying clarify your decision. So I think that's what he was really kind of getting at. All right. So, and this is in response to something Spencer talked about, that in France, he mentioned that they have a system where you have a card and you go to any doctor, and the doctor can pull up your records. And so Hakasad says, we've got the EPIC system. EPIC is actually one of several companies that does a lot of medical, review or medical record maintenance. Interestingly, when my kids were in college, which is now, 10 to 15 years when they were in college, EPIC was a company that hired a lot of young college graduates. And I know a few people who are still there. They actually have, some decent benefits, and they'll give you a sabbatical after a certain amount of time. You can go any place in the world. I mean, it's an interesting company, but it's not quite universal. With all due respect to Hakasad, it's not quite as universal as all that. It is a system where many medical facilities will use it, and in theory, if you go from one medical facility that uses EPIC systems to another one, all that stuff is going to be kind of consolidated, but it's not the only system out there. And I think what Spencer was getting at is, if you have kind of a national health plan, then all that information will be available. Now there are, the government has a program called HIT, Health Information Technology. And there may be, I think they're doing some work with EPIC and some of the other companies where all this stuff is consolidated. Realize one of the big issues that the government faces in doing this is privacy. There's a real concern that if you put all this information in one place, a bad actor gets into it, your medical records now become, available to anybody who wants them, and they can create a lot of trouble. So I think that there's a real issue here with confidentiality to make sure these records are properly safeguarded. That's not been worked out yet. Roy says, my partner applied to leave the country. She's 56. It depends on where she goes. If you look up, where can I go and still pursue Social Security disability, places like England, you can do it. France, if you go to North Korea or Iran, no. There are just certain countries on the list. Some countries are tied into the U.S. Some are kind of neutral and some are enemies, and you're not going to get any benefit going to a country that was an enemy. So it just kind of depends. Now, the more recent issue that I've run into is that there is a regulation that I think slipped through, quite frankly, that talks about you cannot appear at a hearing unless you are in the United States. Never used to be that way. I've done hearings for people, and I never forget, the guy was in Vietnam, and it was literally a 12-hour difference. It was 8 a.m. my time, 8 p.m. his time. got it approved, did the hearing from Vietnam. Now you can't do that. You have to be in the U.S. Now, whether that means you could be at the U.S. Embassy, which is technically U.S. territory, not really sure. But, you've got to be in the U.S. You've got to be in the U.S. I had a case, my client was in Germany, which is a country that you can live in and still collect benefits. And the judge called me up before the hearing and says, is your client in Germany? I'm like, yeah, can't hold the hearing. So I ended up doing a pre-hearing brief, which was pretty good. That turned out pretty good. Judge approves the case. The client was never here. But I told her, I said, look, if you want to have a person, you got to be in the hearing, you've got to come here. You've got to come back to the U.S. And, that's a lot of money to fly in, to the U.S. just so you can be at a telephone. It's kind of ridiculous. I think this rule got passed and somebody did it without really thinking about what the implications were. So I don't know. It's kind of bizarre, but that's what the rules are right now. December says, I used to live in Connecticut, wrote a letter on behalf of a person with stage 4 cancer, PTSD. The judge wrote back a 10-page denial loaded with insults. She died 3 months living in her car. Yeah, that's very, very rough. All I can say is that there are some judges who are just not nice people. I mean, it's not most of them. Most of the judges, I deal with judges all over the country. Most of them are pretty reasonable. There are some that are out and out friendly, that understand you're under a lot of stress and they want you to feel comfortable. A lot of them are very businesslike. They don't get into they just are very matter of fact, but they're going to give you a fair hearing. There are a couple, and I'll tell you, there's a couple out there that it's a power trip for them. Why a judge would include a bunch of insults is beyond me. Now, I will say this. Sometimes people get denial notices, whether it's from Social Security, administratively, or a judge, and they read more into it than there was. Again, I haven't looked at what you're talking about. I think that's, if that's the case, it's certainly unnecessary. But, people, if you get denied, you're going to be upset. And you may read more into that than was really intended, but who knows? There are a couple of judges that wouldn't surprise me if they did that. Thank goodness there's not many of them, but there are a couple that are power trip, and that's what it is. Okay, I think we live in a society where if you tell somebody they can get it free $1,000, they have to fill out 3 forms. They will never do it. Again, I think what Spencer's point is that, and he is of the belief, and he and I have talked about this, that this is intentional, that the people who are in charge of Social Security, the commissioner and the regional chairs and all that stuff, they intentionally make this system extremely difficult to navigate. I think personally, it's just a typical government bureaucracy that gets more complicated just with the passage of time. There are people there that have jobs. They've got to justify what they do. They're told, update this form. And so they make a 3-page form, a 7-page form, so they can say, well, look what I did. I just think it's entropy. It's just what happens in government. Things get more complicated, longer, more difficult. I don't think there's a plan, personally. Spencer would disagree with me. I don't think there's a plan. But what's ended up happening is, if you think about it, let's just step back and think about this. Social Security disability is designed for people who have a significant medical problem that prevents them from working. Presumably they're in pain. They're not getting a lot of rest. They're not feeling very, very well. Okay, does it make sense to have hundreds of pages of forms they got to fill out, and then have forms that are kind of designed to be tricky without really a lot of instructions? Doesn't really make any sense. I mean, again, you could argue that Social Security, they're sadistic and they're just mean-spirited. I just don't think that's the case. I think, it's designed to weed out the fakers, who are not very many of them, but there are some, from the people who have legitimate medical problems. The problem is that it's grown. And I think it gets to that point where more and more people are kind of sucked into this very complicated system that's really designed, it's a solution looking for a problem, is the saying, meaning that it's really not that big of a problem. Fraud is not that big of a problem, but you have all these anti-fraud things in there to avoid fraud. fraud isn't as big of a problem as they say it is. Most people don't want to be on disability, and you don't make a lot of money from it. It's not like, you're going to all of a sudden get $20,000 a month. You're going to get $1,800 a month, $2,000. Yeah, that's, if you're not deserve it, that's $1,800 the taxpayers are paying. But it's not, if you're going to commit fraud, there are better places to go, in my opinion. So I just think it's a solution looking for a problem, and they just made it overly complicated for that reason. Spencer would tell you it's intentional. Are CEs in the initial application stage a bad sign or a good sign? Consultative evaluation. I don't think I think it's neutral. I think some adjudicators send everybody out for a CE. Others wait until there's a specific reason to do so. Are VA military retirement benefits considered SGA? No, they are not. Now, there are some VA benefits do not offset Social Security. I think the FERS benefits do. So you got to be careful for a period of time. So there's certain benefits that can reduce your Social Security, others not, but VA does not. But it's not considered SGA. It'd be better to let an AI judge decide these weirdos who woke up on the wrong side of the bed. Should be standardized and not subject to some moody judge. Well, I mean, realize the AIs are being programmed by somebody. And so if anything, if they use AI, first of all, they'll never use AI 100%. My prediction is within 10 years, the AI judge will make the initial decision, and you'll have an opportunity to go in front of a live judge if you want to challenge it, because there's certainly enough data out there to determine which cases should be approved based on whatever requirements are given to the AI tool. Most judges are not unreasonable. I mean, there are a few that are, no question about it, but most of them are pretty reasonable. But they're human beings. And so, you have a person who finds you not believable, or who, like Spencer mentions, is ex-military. They get up at 5:30 in the morning, they make their bed, you could bounce a dime on it. They've had medical problems and they get, first-class care. And they look at you saying, what's the big deal? I had the same problem and I'm fine. Well, yeah, you had, gold-plated health insurance and rehab and all this other stuff, plus you were doing a job from your desk and you could work out as opposed to doing a physical labor type of job. So I don't think that the judges by and large are dishonest or mean-spirited. Some are going to be more difficult than others. And again, if I think that judges that tend to approve fewer cases will approve those cases that are 55 and older or 50 and older. There are very, very few who are just out to lunch, in my opinion. So, but I don't think AI is the answer necessarily, because somebody's got to tell the AI what it needs to look at and realize AI is mathematical. It's a computer program. So, you heard Spencer talking about that they talk in the office, they're trying to get things, the average over the last 20 years, about 35% of initial applications are being approved. Usually those are listing levels. About 18% of recon appeals are approved, and about 45 to 50% of hearings are approved. You could plug that into an AI. Do you think it's going to be any different than what we got now? The younger applicants are going to be denied. The older ones are going to get approved. The limited number of younger ones that are approved are going to have something really serious. It may be a little more standardized, but the end result's not going to be a whole lot different than what we got now, in my opinion. Kathy Clayton had a very favorable CE. Does ALJ give weight? Yes. Listed limits of sitting, standing, walking. Suggests a mental health exam. Yeah, I mean, I think that judges are going to look at that. They don't have to give it controlling weight, but it is valuable evidence. I mean, I write briefs every day, and if I have one I was working on today, I had a really strong CE consultative, and I talked about that a lot in my brief. That the Social Security consultative evaluation talked about marked limitations in sitting, standing, and walking. Well, marked means that it's something you can only do maybe less than 1/3 of the day. So that was really helpful. So I'm going to focus on that. Judge doesn't have to accept it, but it's valuable evidence. And like Spencer said, Social Security is paying these doctors, if somebody comes back with something like that, that's kind of a message that it's pretty significant. Were cases audited based on approval or disapproval rate of ALJs? According to Spencer, no. It's more by the hearing office itself. I found that as well. I mean, if they were individual judges were being approved or being audited, there was one point when Congress got involved and they called some high approval judges to testify before Congress. If you want to see it, go to YouTube and type in Trey Gowdy, Treygowdy. Trey Gowdy's a former, I think in South Carolina, representative, and he was grilling a Social Security judge with a 99% approval rate. So, and I'd been in front of this judge, by the way, so I knew the judge, and he honestly was granting cases without any analysis whatsoever. But if you want to see, Congress going after a judge, look up Trey Gowdy going after, I forget the guy's name, but it was a judge who was squirming on the hot seat, let's say, put it that way. But generally speaking, if they're going to analyze somebody, it's going to be a judge with a high approval rate, not the low. So anyway, Cynthia says, hello, Cynthia. And KU Thunder says, hello, Cynthia, as well. I am the greatest thing since sliced bread. Okay. I don't know about that. But okay, I'll take the compliment. I never understood that saying, greatest thing since sliced bread. I'm guessing the thought being that when commercial slicers came into being, it made bread easier to work with, and you could make sandwiches and didn't have to cut it yourself. But I know there's a lot more things, a lot more technical innovations that to me are more important than sliced bread. I don't know why I thought of this, but I asked my dad. My dad was born in 1919. He's passed away a number of years ago. But I asked him one time, and he was in World War II, and he'd seen a lot in his life, and a really bright guy. And I said, what's the biggest change you've seen in your lifetime? And this is probably in the 1980s or 90s. I asked him this. And he said to me, air conditioning, because when he was growing up and he was from Atlanta, it was so hot in the summertime that you couldn't work. And back then, and he worked for the Atlanta newspaper, you were expected to come to work in a coat and tie. And you're in a coat and tie, and it's 85, 90 degrees in the office because you couldn't work. It was just too hot. And, productivity plummeted. If you were in Miami, forget about it. New Orleans, forget about it. You just couldn't work. It was just too hot. He goes, air conditioning comes into play, and all of a sudden, places like Miami become big time business centers. Atlanta becomes a commercial banking hub. Charlotte becomes a banking hub because people can work, for 12 months a year. So whatever it's worth, sliced bread, great. Air conditioning, a lot more important. At least my dad said that. I would agree with him. All right. Hal Clayton says, if we can ask, of course you can ask. That's why I'm here. Is seeing a pain specialist for years helpful or a hindrance? Talking about prescribed medications, various therapies. If you're in long-term pain management, that is evidence that you've got a chronic problem that can only be treated with that. Perhaps you're not a surgical candidate. Now, a number of years ago, there was some scandal because some of these pain clinics were handing out OxyContin and hydrocodone like it was candy. Now, they're very much regulated. So, if you're on, and you typically have to sign a contract, you've got to go in once or twice every other month or something. So I don't think seeing a pain specialist is a hindrance at all. I think it just shows that you've got a condition either that is not surgical in nature or that you chose not to have surgery. And this is to let you survive. And as long as you are abiding by the contract, the opioid contract, or whatever the contract they have with you, you've agreed not to go to other doctors to get double prescriptions, you agree not to sell the meds, things like that. I think that's a really strong evidence that you've got a chronic, intractable medical problem that cannot be, you can't really work through because it's the side effects or because, you're in too much pain. Robert, there you go. Yes, we got Robert, we had a case And I wrote the brief. It turned out to be really good. I mean, and I work on them. All my briefs I think are pretty good, but this one, for whatever reason, we had a lot of good evidence. And basically, I get a call from the judge, the judge's office, maybe a week before the hearing. Judge read your brief. We're going to go ahead and approve the case. No need for the hearing. And this is a judge whose reviews were that she was really smart, but her approval ratings were in the 40s. It was not a high-paid judge. So we were very fortunate that Robert's case, the judge saw it, that the brief turned out to be pretty good. And again, it was a good brief because I had great evidence. And Robert had a lot of credibility. There's a lot of things about his case that made it really good. But that was a great day for both of us. I know I called him. I was like, Robert, I just got a call from the judge. They approved your case, no hearing. He was like, wow, that's awesome. So I'm expecting a good review from you, Robert, though. But yeah, that was a good day. Okay, Patrick O'Malley, thank you for having these sessions. Okay, very good. My pleasure. Bala says, unskilled and higher educated graduates, it's more difficult to get them approved. Not really. Honestly, I don't think that my experience has been that your age is more important than your education. Over 50 makes a difference. Better to be over 55, being over 50 helps. Being higher educated, the way I would look at it is, and if you look at the grid rules, they talk about, do you have capacity to make a direct entry into skilled work, or do you have transferable skills? So if you are a college graduate, I've argued this in briefs, that simply having a college degree does not give you the access to a skilled position, especially if that job or that education was 30, 40 years ago. Yeah, it shows that you've got intelligence. It shows that you stuck and got through college, but it doesn't give you any secret password into a high-paying job, or doesn't bypass normal hiring practices. So in my view, it really doesn't, make that much of a difference. Now, if you have an 8th grade education, that's going to help you because that's assumed pretty much you're going to be an unskilled job. But I find if you've got a college education and you've got a condition that causes a great deal of pain or a lot of other medical issues, you can argue that those non-exertional impairments such as pain or bathroom issues or fatigue would erode any skills that you might have. So the bottom line is, I don't think that higher education or being a college graduate is going to really make much of a difference at all. At least not in my experience. They say putting caps on pens or folding towels, as if anyone's doing that. Yeah, this is an issue because the Dictionary of Occupational Titles, describes jobs that are entry level, minimum wage, unskilled jobs. But as Spencer pointed out, there really are no unskilled jobs. I mean, there's an attorney named Lawrence Rolfing, or Larry Rolfing, Rohlfing, and he's got a blog, California Social Security Disability Attorney. He talks about that a lot, that there really are no unskilled jobs. Every job nowadays, you've got to have some computer skills, you've got to do multitasking. So, there really aren't that many really, really entry-level, unskilled, jobs. You don't have to use a computer. Look, I mean, think about it. You get your Amazon driver a delivery job, which again, I'm not saying it's not unskilled, but I mean, that's not, you're basically driving around and you're dropping packages off. But what are you using? You're using your phone. I mean, you're having somebody sign something on your phone. You've got to look up directions on your phone. You've got to file a little report that you dropped it off. Many times take a picture of the item. That's not, that's a lot of steps. And so that may be considered a semi-skilled job, but it's really starting to get into more of a skilled job. And even unskilled jobs, packing ink pens in a box. I mean, there may be a computer requirement that you've got to put into the computer how many times you did that. So I think that one of the things Social Security is struggling with is understanding what jobs really exist out there, and are there really any truly unskilled jobs? And I think you make a good point that there probably really are not. If someone has obtained FMLA to hold the job they've had, well, FMLA basically is family medical leave. is you're off because you can't, either you or a family member is sick and you can't do it. I think that is, if it's you, that's evidence, and you had a doctor sign off on it, that's evidence that you have a problem with attendance or reliability. Is it going to determine your case? No, but it is a factor there. If it's because of somebody else, it's not going to help you, but it's because of you, I think it would. Okay, we got time for a few more. We're at 1 hour and 54 minutes. Melissa, 58 years old, 55 when filed, hearing 722, neck and back, 2 fusions, pain meds, work history as a manager. How do I address not being able to supervise, energy focus, urgency, etc.? I think what I would argue, Melissa, is that your non-exertional impairments, pain medication side effects, cognitive difficulty focusing, maintaining attention and concentration, maybe if there's bathroom issues because you're nauseous, poor non-restorative sleep, those are going to erode any skills that you might have, and particularly the skills you might have had as a manager. So I think that's how you deal with it. Just that you basically say that the pain, medication side effects, all these non-exertional problems are going to erode any transferability of skills. And I've not had that be a problem. I think that's an argument I use a lot. The other thing you can argue is that your past work was industry specific. You may have been a manager at, let's just say at a I don't know, manufacturing plant. That doesn't mean you could be a manager, at a restaurant, or you could be a manager at a personnel agency. I mean, there are different skills. And again, if you're limited to sedentary work, you can use that PALMS regulation where it's minimal vocational adjustment. But you can always argue that your skills are industry specific, and I do that a lot. Contact the media. Get an interested reporter. I've actually done, I've had a number of people in the media contact me because I'm out there. I've got the YouTube channel, and I've been interviewed on the news several times about some of these things. I used to issue press releases, don't really do that anymore, but, I don't know that it's something that, I hate to say it, that many people care about. There are stories you get, and you'll see these stories sometimes where a person is literally on their deathbed, and they got a bed in the living room, and they're on 30 different medications, and they can't feed themselves, and some judge denied them. And so it'll be picked up by the news, and, the Social Security is kind of shamed into approving that person. And, that is, by the way, a tactic. If you get denied and you think it's really outrageous, contact your local consumer reporter, and they might do a story on it. But I've been interviewed a few times. It's just not a top of mind thing, but yeah, that I have been interviewed a couple of times. Okay. Patrick says they sent you a headache questionnaire, and you're rated the highest rate by the VA. Yeah. I've actually got a headache case coming up next week. I just sent my client the brief today. We're going to be talking tomorrow. Migraine headaches, intractable, medication resistant. I think we have a good argument that, this gentleman has a long, productive work history, but when you have 2 or 3 migraines a week that last 4 to 12 hours, not much you can do. It's going to come down to, is the judge going to accept it? I'm hoping that the judge will. And Hakasad says, as a doctor, you should do the ethical thing and see what the medical conditions prove. No one can fault a doctor for calling out or for telling Social Security the truth, I guess is what you're saying. Look, doctors are like anybody else. There are some doctors. I remember I was at a cocktail party one time, or somebody's house, a cocktail party, but I guess drinks were being served. I'm not a drinker, but let's say it was somebody's house. It was a party. And there was a guy there who was a doctor, I think an orthopedic doctor, and he and I were talking. This is going back a number of years ago. He and I were talking, and he said to me, I asked, he said, what do you do? I said, I'm a Social Security disability attorney. He looks at me and goes, well, I don't think that anybody is truly disabled. That everybody out there could do something. And I said, well, here's the problem with that. Maybe they could do something for a couple of days, but if you have a chronic medical problem, doing something 8 hours a day, 5 days a week ongoing might very well be impossible. And he never would agree with me. No, everybody can do something. If they had to eat, they could do something. Spencer and I talked about it. Somebody should do a study. If you're a PhD candidate someplace, you want to do a study, follow people that were denied disability benefits. What happened to them? And I'm betting you that a decent percentage of those people are homeless or living with family on a couch someplace. They didn't go back to work. So, doctors, some of them don't believe in the idea of disability. There was a doctor here in Atlanta who was a rheumatologist and a very highly regarded rheumatologist, and a lot of people with fibromyalgia would treat with her. But if you went to her website, it would say, we are an ability medical practice, not a disability practice. We will not fill out forms, because if we tell you you're disabled, you're going to buy into that and you're not going to recover. So it depends on the doctor. I think that you have to be straight up with your doctor. December says you should never tell your doctor about addiction. I understand that, but it's going to be in your medical record. And if it helps your treatment to know that you can't take opioids, or that you had a problem with them, or you're having a problem with them, I don't think you want to hold things back from your doctor. But, doesn't mean you need to be aware of what things could go in your record. Yeah, but, you want to be as straight up with your doctor as you can. Okay, we got a couple of other, never met you like pickleball. Okay. I'm a tennis player. I pickleball, I played it. It's fun. I think pickleball, you get more easily hurt than pickleball, because you're bending over and you put a lot of stress on your Achilles, but neither here nor there. Okay, Heather, been out of work since my unexpected brain surgery 28 months ago with no successful treatment plan yet. Been denied an initial recon. Please give you magic healing. Being young and doing unable to function is nearly impossible to prove. I think that you're going to need statements from a neurologist that basically say that your functionality has not returned. This might be a situation where you go to a physical therapy practice and get a formal functional capacity evaluation. You might get third-party statements from people who know you, who can talk about the specific problems you would have. I think you have to get creative, but this might be one where you have to get a formal functional capacity evaluation. If there are physical issues, a physical therapist would do it. If not, you go for a neuropsych evaluation and see what the doctor says there. I was looking at one of those today, as a matter of fact, on another case. So I think you just have to be a little more diligent, and not diligent. You have to be a little more, you have to build the record a little more carefully, because it's going to be more difficult when you were young. But third-party statements, or neuropsych evaluation, a physical therapist functional capacity evaluation might actually do the trick. Okay. St. Louis Grand, and this is about the motorcycle I mentioned before. And that's a good point. He says you can get garage. So the point I was making was that if you have a motorcycle and you're not using it, but it's in the garage because you like to look at it, some judges are going to look at that and say, I think you're riding it, you're lying to me. Why would you keep a depreciating asset? And St. Louis made a very good point. Get insurance garage coverage on it, so that it's not, you can't ride it. That might be the trick. That might do it. But I'd still think sell it. I mean, that's my take on it. It's very cruel. Yeah, it'll be your worst, your best. I mean, realize the hearings are done by phone now, so it doesn't really matter what you're wearing. I think you just have to prepare, and you have to be able to paint a picture of what you're like on a quote unquote average day, where it's not the worst day, not the best day, but maybe a little bit below average, and what you might be able to do 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. And that's, again, what we do in our pre-hearings there. Okay. Chantet says, thank you. We got a hello from California. You know what? It is already at 2 hours. I'm going to cut this off now. Do I help with reconsideration appeals for reinstatement? I don't get involved too much in cessation cases, because most people who are going through a CDR choose to have benefits continue. And if you do that, there's no past due benefits. I can't do it in a contingency. So, Okay. All right, I'll make this the last one. Can losing weight, exercising, or trying to improve your health be used against you? I think it's a double-edged sword, Chloe. I think on one hand, by losing weight, exercising, you're showing that you're trying to get better. And I think that can carry weight with judges. They appreciate when people give up smoking, when they lose weight, when they're trying to get better. But if you get to the point where the problems you've got, sitting, standing, walking, kneeling, crouching, crawling, you can do those things, you may inadvertently, improve yourself back to the point you could work. And of course, maybe that's the good thing. You should go to work and you go for a closed period. So I think it could change things. If you could get back to work and then go for a closed period of disability, that's a really good thing to do. But, a judge is going to look at you and say, where are you at this point? Well, again, was there 12 consecutive months you couldn't work? But if let's say you've gotten much better, then that may end up hurting you. Yeah, it could. I would have to tell you that it could. So, all right. I know I didn't get to everybody. I apologize for that, but it's already almost 11 o'clock here in the great state of Georgia. I'm going to go ahead and end this. We'll see you all next week. I hope everybody has a great rest of your week, a nice weekend, and we'll see you then.